Good morning. Good morning. Are any of you readers? Do any of you like to read novels? Me too. Have you ever had this experience where you're reading the novel and the best part is the epilogue? You get all the way to the end and then the author gives you this epilogue that finishes a character's story who you love or gives a hint of what's to come. Sometimes I read that epilogue and I'm like, oh gosh, I hope he writes that book. Epilogues can be great. Here we are in the Easter season, and on Easter Sunday, we saw that God is faithful in difficulty. Last week, we saw how not only is God faithful in difficulty, following Jesus addresses the difficulty. And that's where the Gospel of John came to a natural end. It said, then Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the disciples' presence, signs that aren't recorded in this scroll. But those things are written so that you will believe that Jesus is the Christ, God's Son, and that believing you will live in his name. The end. And then we turn the page and it says, later. In my Bible, it's titled Jesus and the Miraculous Catch of Fish, but it really just could be titled Epilogue. And the epilogues were common to letters in ancient times, much like epilogues are common on books today, and they served a similar purpose. The epilogue was wrapped up people's stories. And we see in this epilogue that Peter is central. His story is really completed and wrapped up here, but Peter is not alone. It says Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and 2 other disciples were there. There's this theme of 7 that comes back again. 7 disciples are there. It's been a theme for John, but only 5 are named. Simon, who we have just seen is pretty central to a couple of stories, particularly at the cross. Thomas, who is the central character in the previous theme where he is absent when Jesus appears to the disciples. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee. And Nathanael, there's been some stories about Nathanael earlier in the gospel, but we haven't seen him in a while. Nathanael's like that character that you have this great chapter about, and then you're reading through all the other chapters going, when are we going to get back to Nathanael? When are we going to? So we're finally back to Nathanael. Nathanael is there. And then there's James and John, the sons of thunder, Zebedee's sons, who are prominent throughout Scripture. And maybe those are named because they're fishermen. But I think they are named because we have seen their journeys with the Lord. They each have had significant encounters, and now we get to see where they are going. So Simon Peter tells them, I'm going fishing. And they said, we will go with you. And they set out in a boat, but throughout the night they caught nothing. Isn't it interesting that Simon Peter doesn't go alone? Even in the mundane, the everyday stuff. His fellow followers of Jesus don't let him go do that alone. They go with him. It's interesting to me that when Simon Peter betrayed Jesus just a couple pages before, he was alone. He was without his fellow followers of Jesus. He was alone in a crowd. And now, as we get the story of his restoration, that's done together in community. So the first thing we see here in this epilogue as the disciples continue to follow Jesus after the resurrection is they do it together in the mundane and in the restoration. And then there's this narrative of this miraculous catch of fish. And we can't help but see parallels to the story of the miraculous catch of fish in Luke at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. The readers of John's letter would have at least had the oral tradition, the oral passed down story of that miraculous catch at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And it seems that John is intentionally creating a parallel. There's a ton of similarities. It's many of the very same disciples fishing. They work all night. They catch nothing. And they are asked by Jesus, who they do not recognize yet, to do something that makes no sense. The fish aren't on this side of the boat, they're on that side of the boat. But there's also some contrasts. In contrast to the one at the beginning of the ministry where Jesus steps into Simon Peter's boat, Jesus isn't in the boat, he's on the shore. It's a voice carrying across the waters. And it's this image of Jesus won't be with them physically in the same way as he always has. And they can still hear his voice. They can still listen. And when they do, there is this massive, abundant catch of fish. It tells us 153 fish. And there's been a lot of commentary about that number. Some say it's representative of how many countries existed or they knew existed at that time, representing the whole world. Some say it's how many fish they knew, how many species of fish they knew, representing, again, the whole world, all things. And those may be true. They could be true. Those are good points. And they would have been in the habit of counting the fish for the Romans because they had to pay taxes. It was part of their normal everyday life. And what you see in that number is an abundance beyond the disciples' ability to imagine. Just like that first miraculous catch of fish, just like Jesus' first miracle in the Gospel of John where he turns water into wine, but the most abundant, wonderful, huge amount of wine you could possibly imagine. We can listen to God's voice, and when we do, be successful in those endeavors, experience abundance. The natural next steps now would be to clean and go sell these fish. We assume they did. If they took the time to count them, they probably sold them. But first, Jesus says, pause. Pause for some fellowship. Come and sit. Sit around this fire with me and eat. The last time we saw the disciples eating a meal with Jesus, it was a meal that signaled his death. It was the meal over which communion was instituted. And now they share a meal pointing toward resurrection and life, community. And it's more than socializing. You know, when we eat together, we break down barriers. We create vulnerability. Fellowship isn't just doing stuff together. It's not the same as socializing. It's creating places where we are encountering Jesus and helping each other follow Jesus. So pause before you go do that next thing for some fellowship. And it might be missed on us as English readers when we read it, but I don't think it would have been for those early readers. There's this word for fire here that is a very specific word for a charcoal fire. The only other time, the last time actually, we saw that used in the Gospel of John is the charcoal fire Simon Peter sat at when he betrayed Jesus. And it's a signal for our leaders. Pay attention. Right here in fellowship, around this charcoal fire, there's going to be closure for Peter. And Jesus restores him and tells him, feed or tend my sheep. And so we see this picture of what it looks like to follow Jesus after the resurrection. We do it together. We listen for that voice. We fellowship and we care for Jesus' sheep. It's complete with epilogue. And then we turn to Revelation, who arguably is written by the same John. And John's concerned that these followers of Jesus might not get it, that there's misdirection in their worship. They believe in Jesus, but what they value, maybe what they are following without even realizing it, may not be Jesus. He's very concerned about idolatry, which is defined as participating in any activity focused on honoring imperial rulers, local deities, or any system or thing before the love, humility, fellowship, and caring of Jesus. And the opportunities for idolatry to value something else, to follow something else, are abundant. For these readers, there were imperial festivals and public games and public sacrifices. There were dedications. There were professional and community meals that included eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols. Rome's rulers thrived on this puffery, proving themselves superior to those provincials. Rome sought expansion. Their displays of goodwill furthered their own honor and reputation even more than they helped. Their economic practices bolstered the pockets of the elite. Empires inscribed their accomplishments on monuments and paraded their victories through the streets, and they even linked religion to their rule. They claimed to usher a period of peace and prosperity, but the ways of Rome did that at the expense of many, destroying life. And so John contrasts this. All these things you're seeing, this power, this wealth, this influence, what you have been told is needed is the exact opposite of the humility of the Lamb. He calls readers to remember the Jesus that we follow. You know, the one who sat on the ground on the beach around a charcoal cook fire? That soft voice that came across the waves? It's so much easier to worship the security of the empire. It's so much easier to pander to the power of the lion and ignore the lamb. But when we do those things, we don't get the abundant provision and fellowship and restoration that God has for you and for all people. The least alongside the greatest. So we have to ask, what are we tempted to worship? What are we tempted to find our security in? Is it the size of the crowds? Is it the accolades of the rich or the famous or the influential? Is it being treated as special, just a little more special than that other person? Is it in our career success, in our retirement plans? Is it in comfort? We have to ask, in response to this passage in Revelation, are the places of wealth, whether that's financial wealth or relational wealth or spiritual or emotional, are they trickling down to those in need? And as we read this passage, are all tribes, nations, peoples, and languages represented in the crowd? Is power being wielded to bring life to all. When we try to answer those questions on a global scale, it is overwhelming. What could we possibly do to solve all that? And we do have power right where we are planted to listen and follow God's voice in fellowship and caring for Jesus' sheep. I want to share with you one way to do that, to think about that. Because John names all people and every creature in the vision of God's kingdom. So what are we doing to be a safe place of belonging for all of God's children? Dan Vander Plaats created this 5 stages of changing attitudes. He created it specifically thinking of people with disability in mind, but it does apply across all people that are different from our normative cultures, whether that's race or age or sexual orientation or appearance or class or language or fertility. We're judged for that all the time. Whether it's affluence, it applies to all people that are different or we struggle to understand. And so he says this, I'm going to put this slide up, and I just want you to see the visual. Don't worry about the little words. I'm going to talk through it. It says we all start with ignorance. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know another's experience. We might not even recognize who's not in the crowd or in this room. But then he says this. He says, Sometimes we see the thing that's so different, the disability, the orientation, the poverty in someone's life as a result of sin. We see it in Scripture when people ask, why is that man blind? Is it his sin or the sin of his parents? Where they directly correlated it. But if we're being honest, sometimes we think, well, if that person just got themselves together or worked a little harder or didn't drink, then they wouldn't be poor. We judge it out of our own ignorance. He says that we need to move from ignorance to pity. When we move to pity, we move to a place where we feel bad, where we realize this person needs help to fully belong, to really be part of this, that the hoops we're asking them to jump through are actually keeping them out. But if we're honest, sometimes we don't really see the purpose or meaning of their lives in the situation they're in. We think that's too bad. He says we need to move from pity to care. When we care, we start to realize and remember that everybody's created in God's image just the way they are. Just the way they are in this season of their life. And by that virtue alone, they are valuable, deeply valuable. Their life has value and meaning. And we start to make efforts for things that will specifically minister to their situation. We do ministries in places and times and contexts that are more accessible and relevant to people's lives. Perhaps we make our buildings themselves more accessible or change where we worship. But we can't end there. He says the next step is friendship. When we move to friendship, we have spent time with people not like us. And we know that our lives are better for knowing them. And that's powerful. But he says it's still not enough. We need to move from friendship to co-laborers, where each and every fiber of our being knows that every single person is called and has unique and necessary things to add to our lives and our community. We're not offering people a place out of pity or just creating space that they can be a part of it. We're actually co-laboring alongside, learning from. We realize it's not our job to fix whatever is happening in their lives, but to walk together and learn from each other. We need those that our world has deemed as less or other so desperately. And we can't do that unless we get proximate, unless we go to where people are and spend time, unless we are curious, and unless we walk in humility. So here's my question. When you look at this, where do you do well? Where can you grow? Where can we as a community grow? What's one thing in the next few months you can do individually and as part of this community to grow us towards a place where every single person is invited to belong and co-labor alongside us? And it's the opposite of puffery. It's sitting around a charcoal cook fire and shoving over to make room for someone else to have that really good spot in the warmth. When Jesus tells Simon Peter, feed my sheep, that word bosco, translated tend sometimes, it's a word that portrays the privilege and responsibility of following Jesus to promote the spiritual well-being of an individual in every single way. To promote someone's well-being in every way. That can't be reduced to a program or a curriculum or even a service. It's every person in every way. It's about how we live individually and in community, because we are part of the Divine Epilogue. Are we willing to make the courageous move to stop pandering to power and to together with all of God's people listen, fellowship, and tend to Jesus' sheep?